My oh wowie wow, it's been a while, hasn't it? Good to see you, microphone. Good to see you, water bottle. Good to see you, desk. That won't be here very long. And good to see you, everyone. My name is Robbie Howell. I am a tabletop game designer, a lover of history, and a almost lifelong player of Age of Empires 2. And today we're going to be tackling a civilization from North Asia, which a couple of commenters have mentioned in the past. Yes, indeed, my good friends, I am talking about the Khitans. Yes, indeed, the Khitans. It's a real funky build, one that I've been working on for months and months now. Frankly, I was working on it well before I went on paternity leave, and I'm very glad to be able to finally bring it to you today. Some disclaimers before we start. As per always, you can check the screen in front of you if you're new to the channel, haven't seen one of my builds before. But also, to all of you, I'm going to be trying some new things with this presentation today. I've been really trying to figure out how I can change up my format to make these videos take less long to make. So I'd love to hear your feedback. I'm trying to simplify and strip down the entire process. All that nonsense aside, let's jump into the history of the Khitans. And as always, a link to the civilization document can be found in the description down below. Let's learn about Khitan history. Do you know where the Khitans are from? Nor did I before I started this video, but much like many East and North Asian cultures, their destiny is closely entwined with that of China to their south. The Khitans are a Manchurian people. Originally, they were 8 semi-nomadic tribes starting in about the 400s AD. They lived in the Mongolia, Manchuria area. They had small communities that would move around occasionally and were very, very well known to China. Among the clans, the Yelu and Xiao clans were most prominent, though early on there were some others that vied for power. But going forwards into Khitan history, just know the Yelu are the most important and the Xiao are the second most important. Pretty much always the leader of the Khitans, once they would become unified, spoilers, would be from the Yelu clan. Like I said, the Khitans were very well known to the Chinese. They traded a lot. They were vassal states to the Chinese on and off. They were hired by the Chinese to fight as mercenaries, and also the Chinese helped them fight some of their local wars. They were also renowned for their toughness. I believe there's one Chinese adage from the era that would say that the Khitans would not even cry at the death of their parents. Despite that, though, they were briefly conquered by some Turkic tribes, all funded by the Chinese. You start to realize that the Khitans were maybe getting a little too big for their britches. Notably, the Uyghurs briefly ruled them and exacted tribute before moving on to greater things in the West, which the Khitans would follow them to later in history. But more on that later. Now, let's roll forward to the late 800s AD. The Tang dynasty is starting to come down, and the Khitans realize this. They reorganize their society, adopting a much more centralized format. The tribes unify into one united body. They take on some like Chinese political structuring systems, and then they go on a storm of conquest, taking North Korea and later northern China, founding the mighty Liao dynasty in 907 AD. And the Liao owned about half of China. They were really, really powerful. In fact, by the 950s, there were 3 times as many Chinese subjects of the Liao as there were Khitans in total. They had a huge population. They took everything in northern China. And because of that, they became de facto the rulers of East Asia, or at least the top dog at the time. Now, the Song dynasty, which were the southern Chinese dynasty that formed after the Tang collapsed, they pretty much ceded the north to the Liao and didn't really even try to stop them. Mostly they were busy fighting the Xia to their west, who are kind of in the Tibet-ish area. I will have them represented on the map with my own Tibetan icon. Go check out my video on the Tibetans if you haven't seen it yet. Now, the Song, though they mostly ignored the Liao, it doesn't mean that the Liao ignored the Song. In fact, the Liao forced the Song to sign an absolutely brutal treaty in 1004 that, first of all, prevented the Song from fortifying their border, exacted a ton of tribute, double E, and even forced them into a couple of proxy wars that they really didn't want to fight, triple E. It just wasn't a healthy relationship, and it really solidified who was the top dog in Asia at the time. And at the same time that the Khitans were doing this to the Song in the south, they were also conquering the Jurchens and the Koreans in the east. They conquered almost all of Korea at one point. They forced massive tribute and vassalage. They stomped out rebellions. If you haven't seen my video on the Jurchens, make sure you take a look at that now as well. They're very relevant to Khitan history. And you know what else is relevant to Khitan history? The fact that their legacy was so tremendous that the Western term Cathay, you may have heard that being used in history, as well as in pop culture such as Warhammer, to refer to China. It was known as Cathay. That word Cathay comes from the word Khitan. And so China was the land of the Khitans. That's just how powerful and well-connected the Liao were during their height. And so, during this time, as you might expect, they also adopted a whole load of Chinese culture, as well as the many useful administrative practices that they had established over millennia of being a profoundly powerful civilization. And as such, the Khitans became largely Sinicized. Though, much like the Jurchens later would when the Jurchens ruled China, the Liao emperors would still try to establish nomad cred, going out and sleeping in tents and going on hunts and stuff like that, just to show their Khitan subjects that they hadn't forgotten their roots, And so the Liao dynasty was very, very powerful, and they had many vassals, they were filthy rich, and they ruled China for the rest of time. You know that's not true. The Jurchens came to power in the 1100s. The Liao were in power for maybe 200 years, which in the grand scheme of China is not a bad thing. However, a bunch of rebellions started to pop up in Manchuria. The Jurchens capitalized on this, and if you've seen my Jurchens video, once again, you'll know that they too unified, much like the Liao did, kicked the Liao out of China in alliance with the Song from the south, and finally the Liao fell in 1120 AD, and the Liao fled west, founding the Karakitai, those who are without honor. Yes, indeed, the famous, Age of Empires famous, antagonists of Genghis Khan in the early scenarios were, in fact, Khitan in origin. They were originally, they called themselves largely the Xi Liao, like the Western Liao, but they would go on to take on the name Karakitai, or I believe it's Black Khitans, I think that's the translation, and would found a pretty remarkably successful empire in relatively short order. The survivors rallied together, moved out west, and managed to set up a pretty robust little state, even against the very strong aggressions of their many Muslim neighbors. However, less than 100 years later, there would be a much, much bigger problem, namely the Mongols. The Mongols, as we have played out in Age of Kings, absolutely whacked the Karakitai and brought down over 300 years of unified Khitan rule. Now, even after this point, Liao influence lingered in China, both in the term Cathay, as I mentioned, and also in the fact that many of the prominent Liao families retained advisorship and noble roles within Song, and then later even Mongol society when the Mongols ruled China. And so they left a pretty decent-sized footprint. But beyond that, largely speaking, the Khitan people kind of assimilated into the broader Central Asian gene pool long, long ago. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find someone today who called themselves Khitan. However, it is known that as late as the 1800s, some people in Central Asia did identify themselves as being part of the Karakitai, using that national name as a way of signifying their ancient lineage and their pride and their kind of interesting harmonization of Turkic cultures, Chinese cultures, and a little bit of the Central Asian Muslim influence cultures, all that of which boiled together in that magical less than 100 years when the Karakitai seemed to be one of the most promising dynasties that might have led to rule much of Central Asia, were it not from the Mongols. And so that's Khitan history in a nutshell. They lived fast, they died young, but man, they left a substantial impact. And because of that, let's move on to the flavor at this point. Some of the beautiful details that make an Age of Empires civilization special. To begin, their architecture. It will be North Asian. If you don't know what North Asian architecture is, there's a good reason for that, because I made it up. I have details on it in my Tibetans video, which I mentioned earlier. Go check that out if you'd like to see more. But they would convert to East Asian architecture in the Imperial Age, representing how they largely Sinicized after founding the Liao dynasty. They would also have unique skins for the town center and the castle, of course. Castle is a de facto, but the town center is a very important building to the Khitans, so it gets a unique skin for them as well. Their language would be Khitan, Kudu, ladies and gentlemen. This is not a well-known language. There's a decent amount of records about it. However, it's not super easy to research, and there aren't a lot of like modern cognates that we can look to besides like Mongolian and some Turkic stuff. So this is the best I could come up with. I'm sure it would be feasible to implement in-game in a more proper manner. Their wonder would be the beautiful Tianning Temple. This marvelous structure was created during the Liao Dynasty and still stands today. And if you want to see some AI player names, make sure to take a look on screen right now. I'm not going to read them all out, but just know that this, as well as many other details, can be found on the Civilization document linked in the description below. Moving on to some campaigns. As per usual, I have a couple of different offerings for you guys, 3 specifically, with a couple of less perfect options later as well. First of all, Taizu, or as he was known before taking on that honorific name, Yelu Abaoji. Taizu was the man who unified the 8 great Khitan tribes and used his new position as their supreme leader to take over much of North Korea and then lay the groundwork for his son to finish the job and conquer northern China, founding the Liao dynasty. Taizu, I think, actually did found the Liao, but didn't secure the Liao's foothold in China in full, instead alley-ooping his son to do the rest of the work, but he's obviously a very important fellow. I think you could even very easily make an argument that a campaign about Taizu could also have his son Taizong play out the second half of the campaign. So he gets like the first 3, and then Taizong gets the second 3, something like that. It's a classic story. Unify the tribes, found our empire. We have had many of these in Age of Empires, but it doesn't mean it's not a fun storyline, and I think it could be really enjoyable, especially because it would see the Koreans featuring as major antagonists, which I don't think they do in any other campaign, yet at least. Another option would be Yelu Dashi. I think that he's actually even more interesting than Taizu. This is the fellow who, the main figurehead who rallied the survivors of the Liao to go out west and found the Kara Kitai. He technically was a usurper, having done away with the rather ineffectual proper emperor of the Liao around the time that the Jurchens invaded and stomped everything, but you could argue that he was mostly just finishing what had already been started and needed to do so in order to consolidate power such that he could save as many people as possible. Either way, it would make for a fairly interesting moral conundrum, as well as featuring a lot of different civilizations. You'd have obviously the Jurchens and the Song, then you could have maybe the Xia and some of the other Turkey peoples that would be in his path going out west, and then the various Muslim rivals that would be there, like Khwarazm. I think it would be a really cool and varied campaign that could show off a lot of the nomadic aspects of the civilization, while still obviously showing their strong imperial elements as well. He would be my personal pick if I had to choose. And lastly, Kushluk. We know him as the antagonist of the second Genghis Khan scenario, and Kushluk, I will say, is kind of a cheat. He is not actually Khitan himself. He is a Naiman, who is one of the Turco-Mongolic peoples in northern Asia, and he actually took shelter and refuge with the Kara Kitai. He was fleeing the Mongols, who eventually caught up to him, but he was not a very good guest, and in fact repaid the kindness that was being extended to him, even marrying into the family, with betrayal. He usurped the Kara Kitai and led to its downfall. Though he was a very interesting, very ambitious individual. He made a lot of interesting alliances with the local Muslim peoples, while himself being a Nestorian Christian who heavily persecuted the Muslims that were under his rule. I know a lot of people aren't fans of villains being the protagonists for campaigns, but Kushluk is kind of iconic in Age of Empires at this point, and I think he has an incredibly interesting story that is unlike any other campaign we see right now, even if it ends in his inevitable death and demise. So those are my 3 picks for the top picks for campaigns, but there's a couple others I would mention as well. For example, you have Emperor Shenzong. He was one of the most impactful Khitan rulers. He established a ton of infrastructure, of course, but he also was the one who pushed the furthest into Korea, while at the same time repelling a bunch of Song invasions. So if you wanted to tell like a classic Liao dynasty story without just telling the story of Taizu and Taizong founding it, I think Shenzong is probably your best bet for like a core Liao ruler. Interesting guy, fought a lot of wars, did a great job at it. The other one, Taizong, I mentioned him as well, the son of Taizu. I see them having like a 2-part campaign, but if you wanted to just focus on Taizong, because he is the one who like properly consolidated power, I wouldn't fault you for that at all. And lastly, Yelu Jilugu. And Jilugu was the last true Khitan ruler. He was the final ruler of the Karakitai, minus Kushlug, of course, who usurped him. He was Jilugu's father-in-law. One of his daughters. He married one of his daughters off to Kushlug as a peace offering, effectively, a sign of good faith. And Kushlug was a member of his household. Jilugu was a remarkably capable ruler, fought a multi-front war while being usurped by Kushlug, and actually managed to hold out pretty well, but in the end, it was too much for him. So it's a very heroic end, but you would be on the back foot in this campaign, and it would end in your eventual defeat. And again, I know a lot of people don't like losing, or like having the storyline be one of loss, but I think it's a very compelling story, and frankly, even though I think Yelu Dashi is a more interesting, like he would be a better campaign, I think Yelu Jilugu is my personal favorite of all the characters listed in these campaign options. Additionally, let's talk about some appearances of the Khitans in official campaigns. There are 2. One, Genghis Khan. We all know. The first 2 scenarios, woohoo, Kari Kitai, everyone loves it. And second of all, in the Tamerlane scenarios, the Chagatai Khaganate appears briefly, and you could have the Khitans represent them, because you could see the Chagatai as kind of being a successor, like an inheritor of the Kara Kitai, but not a perfect pick. I'd love to have a civilization that more properly represented the Chagatai way down the line in the future. But for now, a decent stopgap. And unfortunately, besides that, we don't really have any other good options for the Khitans. It's an underrepresented people. They really had a huge impact, but we don't see a lot of stories in the game right now that feature them. Always room for more, and I still think they're an excellent civilization to pick. Now, let's round out this history section by talking about the Khitans' major themes, like the big overarching elements that I saw repeating as I was studying their history. First of all, foreign influence and relations. The Khitans were a remarkably well-connected people. Not only did they have close contacts with China and imported and adapted a lot of Chinese customs and technology and practices and all that sort of things, but many nomadic peoples did. What was the difference with the Khitans? They were really good at it. They had a very powerful merchant class. Even before they established the Liao dynasty, they were the de facto trading and merchant peoples of Northern Asia. They were the ones who kind of resold Chinese goods at a profit, and also the first ones to benefit from Chinese technological developments. So they were like the middlemen of Northern Asia, and really became the wealthiest and most sophisticated of the nomads well before rising to power. Additionally, even when they would vassalize, and they vassalized a lot of peoples during the Liao dynasty and as the Karakitai, even when they vassalized people, those peoples heavily prospered under Khitan rule, despite these like horrifically extortionist treaties that like forced massive amounts of tribute. They still prospered because of just how good the Khitans were at brokering relationships, managing trade, passing along technological developments. The Khitans were good allies and good friends to have. Another major theme, dualism in governance. Now, what does that mean? Well, remember I said earlier the Yelu was the most powerful clan, but the Xiao clan was also very powerful. That was because of something called the Yelu-Xiao Union. These two mighty families brokered a deal by which the ruler of the Khitans at any given time would always be a Yelu man, and he would always take a Xiao wife. These two mighty families, even though the Yelu were the ones who were obviously front and center, the Xiao kind of made sure that they always had a powerful legacy within the seat of power, and in so doing would always protect their interests among the clans. It was this interesting kind of balance of power between the clans, especially these two most powerful ones, that allowed the Khitans to have such a sophisticated government among nomadic peoples. And later on, when they ruled China, they had a dual governance system wherein, like I said, they had a lot more Chinese subjects than they had Khitan subjects, and they largely allowed the Chinese to govern themselves. Still, obviously, under Khitan rule and law, but they didn't really, force people to adopt all of their customs. And as such, they were very good at, maintaining relatively good relations with their subjects, even as foreign conquerors. At one point, they even had 5 capitals, 4 of which were ruled by Chinese governors who reported to the Khitans, and one of whom held to the traditional Khitan system of rulership. And as such, they subdivided their kingdom in a very efficient manner. I will say, though, like the later Jurchens, the cultural differences that arose between the elites of the Khitans, who adopted a lot of Chinese cultures and customs, and the traditional nomadic clan structures, the people who wanted to keep to the old ways, those internal squabbles were probably a large part of what led to their collapse. Last of the major themes I wanted to bring up was military variety. The Khitans, more than almost any civilization I've covered on this channel, have one of the most interestingly broad army compositions that I've ever seen in history. Now, they had huge infantry armies. A lot of people think nomads only fought on horses. No, all nomads fielded infantry, but the Khitans fielded a lot of it. And this was backed up by, obviously, light and heavy cavalry corps, both archers and lancers and more. They were known to use camels even before the days of the Liao dynasty. And by the time they were in the west as the Karakitai, the Khitans fielded elephants. Ooh, that's pretty freaking cool. They have colossal variety in terms of the kind of troops that they fielded. And while they had state-of-the-art armor and were really good archers, as you'd expect for horse nomads, the Chinese often made fun of them for how bad they were in melee combat with swords and halberds and spears. So, huge variety, quick to take on new technologies, many different types of mounts, and even when they weren't great with a new innovation, they still stuck with it. And with that, we come to the end of the history section. If that's all you were here for, thank you guys so much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe before you leave. But for all those of you who, like me, love Age of Empires and want to see what I have done mechanically with this civilization, let's move on to the game mechanics. Beginning with some tech tree additions. As you guys know, I love regional units. I love adding new things to the Age of Empires tech tree, and this civilization is no exception, though in this case, I'm only introducing stuff that I have mentioned in former builds. Let's begin with the Tower Elephant. I first mentioned this in my Persians build. Go look at that up here if you haven't yet. The Tower Elephant is functionally a centerpiece battleship for your army. It's trained from the castle in Imperial Age. It is much like a current Persian war elephant, but in addition to being a massive meat stick that can punch through anything, it can also garrison foot soldiers who can attack out of it at minus 50% rate of fire, but they're completely protected while doing so. So it's a Death Star. It's a very strong unit. It's also obscenely expensive. So only make these if you think you can protect them. Of note, the Khitans do not get the upgrade to the Tower Elephant, namely the Grand Tower Elephant. And the second thing that the Khitans get on their tech tree, which I've mentioned in quite a few builds in the past, is the unique technology Migration Era, or rather regional technology, I should say. It's available in Dark Age and allows your houses, camps, and town centers to become portable. You can pack them up, move them around. Of note, these packed buildings cannot serve as drop-off points, and they don't provide population space. But if you pack up a town center, it can train villagers. You can actually make new ones, even while your guy is moving around. However, a moved town center shoots slower until you hit the castle age, so don't even try to use it for douching. It's also relatively cheap, 75 food, 75 wood. Well, it's not really cheap for Dark Age, but it's affordable in Dark Age, and it's researched very, very quick, so it shouldn't interrupt your flow of villagers all that much. That's all you need to know about their technology tree. Besides that, it is just what you'd expect in Age of Empires. Let's move on to an overview of the civilization, starting with their bonuses. The Khitans, an interference and hybrid civilization. First bonus, idle town centers. Generate between 10 and 30 food and gold per minute. 5 max. Namely, if you have more than 5 town centers, it only counts for 5 of them. You can't stack this infinitely. So this effectively means that you get multiple fetorias worth of food and gold out of your town centers. Once you hit kind of post-imperial, you're done booming, and you can just let your town centers go fallow. Powerful bonus in the ultra late game. A feitoria obviously takes population space. This doesn't. This is just gravy, but do not, please, for the love of God, do not use this earlier than Imperial Age. Yeah, maybe if you get housed or something in Dark or Feudal, it'll give you incremental benefits, but for the most part, this is meant to be a very late game bonus and is, of course, in reference to the famous 5 capitals of the Liao dynasty. Second bonus, you receive a notification whenever an enemy researches a unit upgrade, and you research those upgrades 150% faster. Now, this means that, like, as a little, up in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, it says, Player X has researched this upgrade. If you're on a team, your whole team gets the notification as well, though only you get the benefit from the boost. Not only is this awesome for scouting, you can like see all the tech switches that your opponents make, but it means that you can catch up to them very, very quickly. Especially important if both you and your opponent are like going for crossbows or something. Your opponent gets to crossbow first, doesn't matter. You can jump on crossbow very, very quick as well. It doesn't make the technology cheaper, but it means you get it faster. And this is also going to help in like post-Imperial Age. If your opponent gets to Paladin, you can get to Paladin really fast. Same thing with siege upgrades, all sorts of stuff. It's a nice all-round bonus that will give you some additional speed in your tech switches, but also give you critical scouting information. And it's, of course, in reference to the Khitans adopting technology very quickly, adopting like military technology in particular, and also having such a vast network that they were able to quickly learn what other people in their region were doing. Third bonus, enemy fortifications cost 25% more to build and take twice as much time and resources to repair. This is in direct reference to the Treaty of Shangyuan, where the poor Song were literally banned from building fortifications. I felt like this was a way of showing Khitan vassalizing their surround. Oops. Is this a baby break? I love you.
This one looks like me.
Anyways. This is, of course, in direct reference to the Treaty of Shangyuan, as well as other similar treaties that the Khitans forced on their neighbors and vassals. It is obviously a hyper-aggressive bonus that's meant to gum up your opponent's ability to play defensive, give you that extra opportunity to sneak scouts in before they put up palisades, and in the late game, make it that much harder for them to repair castles and trebuchet wars and that sort of thing. I have a feeling this will be a slept-on bonus and will be stronger than people think. And I think it's quite historically grounded with how the Khitans tended to interact with their neighbors, as well as fight militarily. They had fast armies and breached the Great Wall of China absolutely effortlessly, I should also add. Fourth and last bonus, mounted units, including cavalry archers. Their attacks slow movement speed by between 5 and 20% for 3 seconds. It's obviously a very micro-intensive bonus, but even in terms of things like raiding and then slowing down villagers before they can get back to a town center, you will see a lot of, again, small places where this bonus stacks up, as well as having some really fun outplay potential as well. The Khitan army, especially during the Liao dynasty, were well known for flanking tactics, with cavalry being used to cut off enemy retreats and take their supply lines, and I felt like the best way of summarizing all that in a kind of novel, cool, applicable way was with a movement speed slowing bonus, which I've wanted to do for a while. Team bonus, possibly the strongest thing on the entire civilization in my estimation. Infantry, archers, and cavalry deal +1 damage versus their counters. And what this means is that anytime you have a unit fighting another unit that does bonus damage to it, or would do bonus damage to it, they get +1 attack bonus versus them. For example, spearmen do bonus damage against archers, because archers have an attack bonus versus spearmen. It means that cavalry archers deal bonus damage against spears and skirms, and this is on top of things like Parthian tactics. I foresee being a very strong bonus that not only will really shore up Khitan teams, but also allow them to take like really unexpectedly bad fights and still win, especially in early game. Like, I think that you could take down a spear with scouts like that much faster just because of this bonus. And late game, it means that, for example, their cavalry archers are that much better because everything counters cavalry archers. Their knights are harder to counter. They're just a harder civ to counter, and in Trash Wars, they're going to have a distinct leg up. This being a team bonus was a bit of a risk. And I was trying to use this bonus to overarchingly show not only how versatile the Khitan army was, but also how well they integrated with other armies that they were coordinating with. I think it's awesome. I think it's possibly too strong, but I think that the civilization's non-team bonuses are not like disgusting. So hopefully it balances out in the long run. Let's move on to their unique unit. They only have one. Shocker for me, I know. It's called the Iron Sparrowhawk. It's a hybrid cavalry. I fucking love that name. Iron Sparrowhawk is so cool. Kind of in the same naming convention as the Iron Pagoda that the Jurchens would field later. Now, the Iron Sparrowhawk is a heavy cavalry unit. It costs 50 of all the primary resources. So it's not only quite expensive, but you need a pretty balanced economy in order to capitalize on it. So you can think of it as kind of a cross between a knight and a step lancer. It doesn't have fantastic DPS, like a little worse than both. but it's faster than a knight and has better armor and HP than a step lancer. So tanky, but like not super damaging unit. However, if it is targeting infantry or cavalry that are not fighting it in melee at that moment, they shoot. And so you can think of them as kind of working like they're, again, step lancer-ish. They have that extra little bit of range. Their range attack is similar to a cavalry archer, but it's pretty short ranged and has higher accuracy. They do benefit on that range attack from archer upgrades, but normally they use a melee attack and benefit from melee upgrades. So it's a funky hybrid unit that loves to counter enemy spears, for example, because it gets that little bit of extra bonus damage versus them. It does not get countered by skirmishers even when it's shooting its bow. I forgot, it also gets double effect from the slowing bonus. So the slow still lasts for 3 seconds, but in Imperial Age, you're going to get a 40% movement speed slow, which means that the Iron Sparrowhawk is going to be incredibly annoying for enemies to catch, as well as gumming up their front lines. You can shoot enemy knights to slow them down with their bow attack. You can ride down enemy archers and they won't be able to get away. It's a versatile, funky unit that will fill in a lot of gaps in your army composition, or at least that's the intention. Onto their unique technologies. First of all, in Castle Age, you have the Yelu Xiao Union. I talked about this earlier, and the effect is one of the wackiest ones I think I've ever come up with on this channel. It allows you to use your allies' buildings to produce your own units, and vice versa. Production queues are independent. And so what that means is you can select an ally barracks, and you can train militia, or whatever you want at it, while that ally is using it to build spearmen, or like research the pikeman technology, or anything. And the allies can use your buildings to do that as well. This is so cool. I love this so much. I think it's so fun. And I think that in team games, this could end up being insane, because this almost doubles your production, arguably even more than that. It just makes it so that all allies, all your team's production buildings can kind of be used in tandem with each other. Though I should note, if you have more than one ally, they can't use each other's production buildings. You can use theirs, they can use yours, they can't use each other's. Imperial Age, unique technology, sworn letters. These were like the official decrees by which treaties were signed, and sworn letters make so that this is an older version. There we go, fix it, pardon. Sworn letters. Your team's units train 25% faster. An enemy may tribute resources to temporarily pause this effect. Now, the specifics of this are that an enemy or all enemies together have to tribute to you in total. What was the exact number? I think it was 500 resources per member of your team. This will pause the training speed effect for 5 minutes of in-game time. There's a notification both when you research this effect or when it becomes unpaused, and when an enemy pauses it. So everyone on the field should know when it's coming into effect and when it's not in effect. And there will be a little timer when someone tributes to you representing how long it will last for. However, every time your enemies pause this effect, the next time they do it, the price is doubled. So in a 4v4 game, the first time, it's going to cost 2,000 resources to shut this off. The second time will cost 4,000 resources. Now, this is a very funky bonus. Obviously, if your enemies just let it run wild, it means that late game you will have disgusting production capacities. However, they can always pause it at a price. And I think that putting your enemies in that sort of catch-22 is really fun and very much fits the theme of Khitan history, of vassalizing and forcing people into very bad treaties and capitalizing on the results, as well as the fact that the Khitans had a huge army during the Liao dynasty. I think they had almost 250,000 soldiers at their height, which is just absolutely massive, even by China's history standards. So that is a summary of the Khitans. And remember, as always, to check out the civilization document down in the description if you want more details on any of these bonuses or uniques. Let's move on to their tech tree. We're doing letter grades as normal, but the format is going to be a little bit different this time. Let's begin with their infantry. It's going to be a B. I have pluses and minuses here representing some upsides and downsides within their tech tree overall for infantry. Now, on the plus side, their halberdiers are almost fully upgraded. And both their unit upgrade bonus and their team bonus are quite good for infantry, though admittedly they're good for pretty much all of the Khitan tech tree. So their infantry have some upsides, but as a downside, they don't have blast furnace, which sucks. They don't have champions, which is meh, and they don't have arson, which is also kind of meh. So In summary, your infantry are pretty good. You can actually get some really good oomph out of their, especially their team bonus, giving bonus damage against counter units, and their halberdiers are going to be solid in late game trash wars, but not having Blast Furnace really hurts. Archers, it's an A-. They have not only arbalesters and heavy cavalry archers, as well as Parthian tactics, thumb ring, a whole bunch of nice stuff. But their Iron Sparrowhawk is kind of an archer, and that slowing bonus is great for heavy cavalry archers. On the downside, though, they miss Elite Skirmisher, which really sucks. I took away Elite Skirmisher, both for some historical reasons, because javelins were not like a huge part of their foot soldier army, but more importantly because I thought that Elite Skirmishers would be kind of too disgusting with their team bonus. But they also, even without Elite Skirmishers, they also don't have ring archer armor or hand cannon. So their archers were never going to be perfect, but especially their heavy cavalry archers are very, very solid. Cavalry, it's also an A-. They have a perfect stable minus battle elephants. They have everything. And they also have the tower elephant, which is kind of a cavalry unit. And they also have that slowing bonus, so that mounted units reduce enemy speed. That's very, very nice. But they do miss Blast Furnace. And I would argue that Blast Furnace is much worse to miss on cavalry than on infantry, though it obviously sucks for both. So their cavalry, while it's great, they have the Sparrowhawk, they have all sorts of versatility, they slow down enemies, they don't really have as much oomph as they could. They do have paladins, though, so remember, they still have some very strong options. Their siege is a B. They have Siege Onager, they have Siege Ram, they have their unit upgrade bonus, of course, and you could argue that weakening enemy fortifications or making it harder for enemy to build fortifications is kind of good for Siege, kind of Siege-ish. Their unique technologies are arguably more relevant for Siege, but they miss Siege Engineers, so it's an automatic B. And they don't have Bombard Cannon. Oh, Siege, yay. Such a broad and varied tech tree. Defenses, it's a B+. Now, for the upside, they don't have any, like, truly defensive bonuses, but between slowing enemies and migration era, they have like a lot of like tangential stuff. Even the fact that their units do bonus damage to counters could be maybe seen as kind of defensive. And their university, they only miss Bombard Tower, which kind of hurts in certain scenarios, Treadmill Crane, which kind of hurts in certain scenarios, and Heated Shot, which is useless. So overall, their defenses are pretty solid. You could argue this is a B more than a B+, though. Economy, however, is a C-. It is by far and away their weakest point. Their only true eco bonus is their idle town center thing. You could argue that Yellow Xiao Union kind of is a eco bonus because it makes it such that you don't have to make as many production buildings. And you could argue that Migration Era is a eco bonus or an eco technology. But they also miss both shaft mining technologies and two-man saw. So not having an early or reliable eco bonus and missing a lot of late game technologies is not looking great. I would argue that their economy is actually quite dog. It's not good. And it's one of the main things that I think balances this civilization. Their dock, it's a C+. It's a dock. It's boring. They got the upgrade bonus. I guess that's relevant on water. But they don't have fast fire ship, cannon galleons, or shipwright. That seems pretty C+ to me. What a varied and lush technology tree. Let's move on. Levies. Levies is my term for units that don't cost gold. Trash units, namely. Their team bonus is really relevant in late game trash fights. And they have a lot of, like, again, tangential stuff. Their upgrade bonus and the team bonus, there's the freaking Sworn Letters is relevant. They have a lot of, like, minor things that benefit levies. Though I guess that Sworn Letters is, like, especially relevant for levies because spamming is really useful late game. But on the downside, they don't have Blast Furnace, they don't have Ring Archer Armor, and they don't have Elite Skirmisher, and that really sucks. So their Hussars and Halbs are quite good even while missing Blast Furnace. But not having Elite Skirmisher means they're condemned to a B. Monks, it's a B. What a lush and varied tech tree. I will say, they have Redemption and block printing, and that automatically makes their monks at least somewhat viable in some circumstances. They also have Sanctity. Ooh, yay. They also have Heresy. Oh, that's nice, especially with the Tower Elephant. But they lack pretty much every other relevant monk technology, including Fervor. So it's not awesome, but again, Redemption and block printing is solid. Now, a new category I have for the tech tree section, early game. I would argue the Khitans actually have quite a good early game. Kind of like the Bulgarians, they do not have any early eco bonus, besides arguably Migration Era, which is hardly eco-based, but they have a really good early military. They have pretty much every one of their bonuses is directly relevant in the early game. The unit upgrade thing is going to help with like getting man-at-arms out faster if your enemy's up sooner. It's going to help with the Castle Age transition. Your fortification bonus is going to be really relevant to squeaking in scouts before your enemy can wall off. The movement speed reduction, like the cavalry slowing thing, is going to help for scouts picking off villagers. Your team bonus is really relevant. Their early game is just very, very good with, like, militarily speaking. But again, that completely generic eco holds them back from having a true A+ early game. And lastly, another new category, teams. I give them an A. I thought about an A+, actually. This is one of the best team civilizations in the game. I made it intentionally that way because I felt like their history lent itself really well to this kind of politicking and bolstering their allies and making varied forces. Their fortification bonus is relevant in team games because it affects all enemies. Their team bonus is massive and one of the strongest things about the civilization. They have a lot of tangential things like sworn letters being more relevant in team game because it's more expensive and it affects all enemies to some degree. And rather more importantly than that, it affects your whole team. Yellow Xiao Union is obviously huge in team games and that's the only time you would research it. But once again, they don't have a good eco. So even though they're good in like pocket and flank, you could do all sorts of cool stuff with them in an eco game. You're not really ever going to boom. They're like not an awesome booming civilization until post-imperial. And by that point, everyone's good at booming. And so in summary, one of the best team-based civilizations I've made. And let's move on to their game plan, their overall strategy when you are playing the Khitans. How do I think you would typically play? Well, in the early game, you don't have an eco bonus. Man, that sucks. But you have awesome standard rushes because you have your team bonus, you have your fortification reduction bonus, you have your slow bonuses. You can do archers and scouts just fine, if not good, and your scouts in particular are great. And they also play pretty well on the back foot too because you can catch up with your unit upgrade bonus. You can use migration era as like a panic button if you need to. Good early game. Their mid-game is worse, though, in my opinion. They are perfectly fine, if not actually quite good, knights and crossbows, and have a good variety of units and tech switch options. That bad eco is really going to start to catch up. Like, you actually need to keep applying pressure as the Khitans in mid-game, otherwise you're really going to start to fall behind. But in late game, your game plan switches completely. Your power units start to fall off because of those critical missing technologies. And now, instead of like, you have your strong power units and you need to make sure you're taking good fights and trading very efficiently, now forget all that. You're going quantity, baby. You're just sending out a flood of varied units because you have a huge tech tree at this point. You can tech into anything with your bonus. And also, you want to be taking really strategically advantageous fights. Think about what bad matchups you can win. Can my hussars actually beat halberdiers under certain circumstances? Can I ever make skirmishers, even though I don't have the elite upgrade, and still have them have an impact? How do I use my heavy cavalry archers? Where do I put my iron sparrowhawks? Those sort of things are going to be even more relevant to the Khitans than usual, and you don't have the ability to just make like a big dumb power unit and like attack move into your enemy's base. So keep track of timings in your enemy tech switches, which you can monitor much more easily thanks to those notifications. And also, you can pressure castles really well and slow down enemy advances. So you have a lot of tricky tricks that you can bring to bear in the late game, even though you're more focusing on quantity rather than quality at that point. And lastly, overall, things to think about when playing the Khitans is you're amazing in team games, great in flank and pocket, relevant in teams at all stages of the game, and you can shore up weaknesses in your army comp, but the only thing that you're always going to have a problem with is your poor eco, and that also holds true in team games, as well as the fact that you don't really have a good juggernaut unit. Yes, you have paladins. Paladins are good, but paladins without blast furnace does kind of suck. So, like, well, I mean, it doesn't suck. It's still a paladin, right? But you're probably going to lose to a lot of other civilizations' cavaliers, and as such, you need to rely on more strategy. Your paladins can slow movement speed. Think about how that comes into play. Your paladins have an attack bonus versus camels and pikes or halbs. Think about how that comes into play. So it's a civilization that is high micro and does all sorts of funky stuff, especially in the early game, then transitions later in the game into a more broad-scale macro-level game plan, though micro will still be relevant. And there we have the Khitans summarized. Before we wrap up, let's take a look at a couple loose threads, some thoughts that didn't quite get resolved for me when I was doing the build, as well as a couple of ideas I didn't quite get to feature. For one, that team bonus really does seem strong, like maybe too strong. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. I think it's really cool. I think it's like the heart of the civilization for me, but if it's just too disgusting and you guys can come up with some scenarios that I didn't think of, I'll change it. And that idle TC bonus, I do like it. I think the grounding is cool, but it does kind of like suggest to new players, hey, you should idle your town center. So maybe that's not a great thing to encourage. Maybe I could do something like, oh, the TC bonus only kicks in an Imperial Age or something. But let's move into some tabled ideas, things that I thought about doing in this build but didn't quite get around to. I've been thinking about making regional cataphract units for a long time, and I was thinking about introducing them in this build, but I just didn't quite have the time, and I didn't quite finalize exactly what I wanted for that unit. So if you want to see cataphracts in a future build, let me know. Should the civilization get the caravanserai? Technically, maybe? I don't know. That's why it's a tabled idea. In retrospect, they probably should have gotten the caravanserai, which I've featured on a couple of other builds before. I also thought maybe they should get like Central Asian architecture to represent the Karakitai, like maybe an Imperial Age, but that does really pigeonhole the civilization's aesthetic to a very specific part of their history. I thought that the East Asian in Imperial Age might be more broad-ranging and also more what people expect to see. I also strongly thought about giving them like a trade bonus of some kind instead of the TC bonus, because they really... Trade was such a huge part of their existence that it felt like a shame to miss out on it, but I just felt like there were other ways to represent it, and especially since they were such a team-focused civilization already, I didn't want to pigeonhole yet another of their bonuses into being only relevant in teams. In an earlier draft, I also had a much broader theme of like forcing enemies to tribute you. Like in this version of the civilization, this final version, you see that in Sworn Letters, where like you can have an enemy tribute you to turn off the bonus, right? But earlier on, I had like multiple things where like forcing enemies to tribute you, and then you get a benefit when they tribute you. And I thought that was really cool. It just didn't quite come together the way I wanted it to, and I thought it might be a little weird. As if this one isn't, right? I wanted to give you guys a little more conventional one on my first build back. Let's talk about some unique stuff. The Jiaqi Zhuzhuang. This was a unique unit. It was like a heavily armored lancer. And so my thought would be like a cheap boyar. Like imagine if the boyar had way less attack, but still had that massive melee armor and was like dramatically cheaper. So I thought it would be kind of cool as like a cavalry frontliner that's not going to do all that much hard hitting. I kind of kept some ideas like that with the Iron Sparrowhawk, but I liked how the Iron Sparrowhawk reinforced the Civ's hybrid identity more than this unit would have. Next, the Sangun. This was another unique unit idea I had. It was a cavalry unit with an aura that buffed the team bonus. So units around it did even more damage versus their counters. I think this is a cool one. I was very tempted to go with this, but again, the Sparrowhawk was a little more appealing, and I think I've been using auras a little too much lately, so I wanted to like give it a little bit of a rest. A unique technology, slighting treaties. Now, slighting is a really cool term. It's like when in medieval societies, fortifications would be purposely damaged or destroyed. It was usually as like an agreement of treaty, like you destroy your castle and we'll destroy our castle, so that we can like kind of like nuclear disarmament, like mutually assured disarmament. And this would be, at one point I had this as that anti-fortification bonus, where fortifications are harder to make and harder to repair and all that. It was that plus enemy fortifications are just weaker, just have like flat less HP. I thought it was a little drastic, so I shifted it to a civilization bonus instead, but I quite liked the idea, and I thought it was a cool way of capturing that element of their history, and it also felt like fortifications are relevant in almost every game, but not quite every game, and so maybe it would be better as a unique technology instead of a civ bonus. And that's that. Thank you guys so much for watching this build, like the first build back in 2024. I really appreciate your patience during my paternity leave, and I hope that it's been worth the wait. As mentioned, I'm going to be trying to get back to civilization videos at least monthly, and maybe more if things work out going forward, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's look at the likeliniometer. In my opinion, how likely is it on a scale of 1 to 10 that the Khitans, maybe looking something like this civilization here, will appear in an official Age of Empires expansion down the line? And for the Khitans, my likeliniometer score is an 8.5 out of 10. I actually think they are very likely, among the most likely civilizations in the game. I've said for a while, I really want to see the game return to East Asia, split up the Chinese, give some... the Georgians are an obvious pick, and the Khitans are pretty much just second to them. I think they'd be an awesome addition to the game, spice up some of the most classic scenes that we know from Age of Kings, and are just nice and different from a lot of the other nomad horse guys that you see in the game right now. So much so that I think they'd bring some lovely variety to the game we all know and love. But that's just what I think. Now I want to know what you guys think. How do you like my build? What would you have done differently with the Khitans? Are there any elements of the history you think I completely missed on? Are there any parts that you particularly like? What do you think of the new format of these videos? Like I said, I'm trying to find ways to trim down the amount of time I need to spend on them so it's not stressful to crank them out. Maybe I can do it a little more often. And as always, what do you guys want to see me do on this channel going forward? Civilizations, units, topics, stuff, I don't know. It's my first video back in 2024, and my mind is a blank slate ready for you guys to write on. So I'd love to hear from you down in the comments section, and until our next video, my name is Robbie Howell, and ciao for now.